Parliament Procedures and Action Program Incidental Motion. This program is part of the Leadership Success Series. One of the requirements for advanced communicator role is the completion of a program from this series. Please welcome Kerry Jones, Incidental Motion, Kerry Jones.
Thank you, Kerry. It's all Toastmasters. For the past few weeks, I've been giving series of talks on parliamentary procedure and action, and we had a very good example this morning of parliamentary procedure in the bogs down motion. We had Ken making a motion about a foot camera, Jim talking about sound, Jerry talking about authorizing money, and me talking about referring it to committee, and we never did vote on anything. I specifically mentioned a committee of Gary, Jim, and Ken, and what happened? Krista is the one who's going to be investigating it. So the system just totally fell apart.
Occupied Toastmasters.
Parliamentary procedure is to make for a orderly procedure, so that by the time you get to the end, you know exactly what you're voting on. You vote on it so that you know you have the consensus of the group, and then you move on. So we're going to talk a little bit more about it today in some additional motions. We talked about a main motion, we've talked about subsidiary motions, and we've talked about privileged motions. Today we're going to talk about a group of motions that are called incidental motions. And incidental motions are motions that really kind of talk about the way we do things. And during the course of this, we're going to get some help from people, and I will be asking you when I either call on you or point to you, then you will do or read what is on your piece of paper. Now, incidental motions include things like point of order. You heard me raise a point of order in my discussion, and that is when things are getting out of hand or not following the proper procedures. So we're going to try to do this with a little bit more order, and part of that means that you only speak when you have been recognized by the chair, with certain exceptions that we'll learn about as we go. So the chair orders it so that only one person is speaking at a time, and we stay on topic. Now, some of these incidental motions that have to do with the way that the method of transacting business, one is point of order. Now, typically, it is up to the chairperson to be enforcing the rules of order and making sure that we're doing things. But chair people are human. Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they do something that doesn't follow the procedure. Any member of the audience at that point has the right to say point of order, and this is something you can interrupt the speaker for because it's something that needs to be taken care of, and point out the mistake and say, I think we really ought to be doing this. Then the chairperson rules on that point of order, he either agrees with it and says, yes, you're right, we'll do it this other way, or he disagrees and goes on the other way. Well, maybe he still gets it wrong. And so another incidental motion is a motion to appeal the decision of the chair. So if I decide that it's okay to do something, and somebody can say, I move to appeal the motion of the chair, so that the group then becomes a decision of are we following the rules correctly or not. So this gives everybody the right to have some control in this situation. A third situation is a point of information. It's another kind of incidental motion that again can be brought up by interrupting the speaker. And the reason is you may be talking about buying a book camera. And somebody might say, point of information. Do we have enough money in the treasury to pay for this? Because it affects how you vote on it, right? Whether you have money or not. So then the chairperson would call on the treasurer if you got the money. You get that information out there so it'll help you make an informed decision. There's also a motion, an incidental motion, to suspend the rules. This might be brought up in a situation you are going through your agenda, and you have an item on the agenda. Once the agenda is posted, you have to follow it in that order. Well, perhaps Gertrude has to leave at 8:30 today, or 8:15, and we have something that she really needs to be here for. Somebody can do it to suspend the rules, to take an item out of order, so that we can consider it while she's here, get that business done with, and then go back to the general order of things. So you can do that. There's an incidental motion called objection to the consideration of a question. Maybe we have a motion put forward to change the name of our club again to Who Cares Toastmasters. I mean, there are two people who think that's a really clever, cute idea, so somebody makes a motion and somebody seconds it. And the rest of you think that's the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard of. Somebody can make a motion to object to the consideration of the question. And then we will decide whether we really want to go forward with that motion or not. You can kill it right there if the group decides that that is something we don't really want to consider. There is something called the division of a question. Sometimes we make a motion that is kind of complicated and has several parts. I move that we buy a clip camera, and that we buy 3 microphones, and we buy a projector. Well, that's kind of a complicated motion, and somebody might say, I move that we buy the question, and consider those 3 things separately. Buying the clip camera, buying the microphones, and the projector as separate issues. So to divide the question to make it a little bit clearer exactly what you're voting on, because you may object to one of those items and agree with the others. So you may have to divide your vote, so you would want to divide the question and consider them separately. Something called the consideration of by paragraph seriation, and that is applied mostly to making resolutions. Sometimes organizations will make a resolution to commend somebody, have whereas such and such, and whereas, and whereas, and whereas, and whereas. Now, therefore, you resolve that we do such and such. Those can get very complicated, too, and you can move to consider them one at a time. You can read the first paragraph, discuss that, perhaps amend it, then go on to the next paragraph, and then at the end, you vote on it the way it has been completely amended. And the last incidental motion we're going to talk about is called a division of the assembly. And what that is if we take a vote on it, and ayes and nays sound pretty close, and the chair says, ayes have it, somebody doesn't agree with that, they can say, I move for division of assembly, and that means that we have to recount that vote by some other means. All the ayes stand up so we can actually get an accurate count on how the motion, whether it carried or not. So those are basically the 8 incidental motions. We're going to do a little exercise today, and we're going to use some of those motions, and we're going to use proper procedures. So you don't have to speak when you're recognized by the chair. And we're going to start out with Debbie would like to make a motion now that she started reading.
I move that we cancel our December 27th and January 2nd Toastmasters meetings.
Now, this is the main motion. It is a debatable motion, and it requires a second. So is there a second to this motion?
I second it.
We have a motion and second. It has been moved and seconded that we cancel our meetings of December 27th and January 2nd.
Point of order. I believe January 3rd is the Tuesday.
First is Sunday. First is Sunday, second is Monday, third, okay, January 3rd. So it's not a point of order that. You would make a motion to amend at that point.
Oh, okay, all right.
I move to amend it to January 3rd. And then we discuss that, but it is correct. That would be a correct point to put that out. But point of order is related to procedure, and that was actually amending the word of the motion. Okay, so I'd ask if there's any discussion of that. And at this point, I recognize Conduct, because he acts like he wants to discuss this motion, and he stands up and says,
Well, I move that we change our meeting day to Wednesday. Support for changing.
and Eric at this point jumps up and says,
Point of order, Mr. Grand Poupon. I'm just reading my silence. I believe that the motion is out of order since it is irrelevant to the question before us.
now he's made an incidental motion, which is point of order. doesn't require a second, it's not debatable, that's not something to vote on, I just make a decision. So suppose I make a decision, no, it's okay, we can go ahead and discuss on this motion. At which point...
I move to appeal the decision of the chair.
Yeah, appeal, this is an incidental motion. However, it is one that does, and it's okay to interrupt the speaker, but it does require a second. So is there a second to Jim's motion?
I second it.
Okay, an appeal, now this is a debatable motion, so at this point, I would offer Jim to read. Could you tell us why you would like to appeal this motion?
Because I don't think Congress should be allowed to discuss some other issue when we have a established issue on the floor for discussion.
Jim, that's correct. And anybody want to argue in favor of going ahead with this? Or actually, the question here, the question is, should we sustain the chair's decision? It's not whether Ron's motion is not correct, but should we just sustain it? He said we should overrule the chairman because that was irrelevant. Anybody think it was okay for me to do it?
Does it require a second?
It does require a second.
Well, I move that we override the chairman's decision.
So, you've all voted and you have overridden my chairman based on my statement.
You should throw them out, too.
So, but Gary really wants to talk about condos, ideas, so Gary's going to make a motion.
I move to suspend the rules so we can consider the day before we decide.
Okay, is there a second? That's the motion required a second.
I second the motion.
So that motion is seconded. Now, this is not a debatable motion. At this point, we would just vote on, are we going to suspend the rules to talk about condos issue instead of Debbie's? This is a thing that would require a 2/3 vote rather than a majority. Something that we don't want to just willy-nilly overrule, change the rules. So it's something that's a little more important, so it requires a 2/3 majority. So we're going to say that majority says no, we're going to follow the rules the way they're set out. So we're now back to, what is the question before us? The question before us is Debbie's motion. Should we cancel the meetings on December 27th and January 3rd? Well, it was amended to the 3rd.
Sure.
And Ken is at this point during the discussion that
I move that we just divide the question and consider the two dates separately.
this is an important, this is a very applicable question because some people might want to come on the 2nd, but they don't want to come on, between the holidays. So it is something that would be worth dividing the question for. It is something that he wouldn't interrupt to make that motion, but when he's recognized, he can make that motion. It does require a second. Is there a second?
I heard Jim say nice.
I seconded it.
To divide the question is not a debatable motion. So we would, at this point, just take a vote on whether we want to divide the question or not. If we choose to do that, then we would now have two motions which we would consider in order. First, we would consider, do we want to cancel the meeting on January 2nd? We can discuss the pros and cons of that, take a vote, then we would move on to the question of, do we want to cancel January 3rd? And take a vote. So it keeps everything orderly, it keeps it very clear and concise exactly what you're talking about at any time. So, but during the discussion, before we've taken a vote on whether we want to cancel it, our Linda pops up and says,
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
now this would have meant she would be recognized. Now this is a privileged motion, so we have to consider it. We're not talking about the dates anymore because our Linda wants to adjourn the motion. It is a motion that requires a second.
Well, I second that.
There is no debate. So we take a vote. All those in favor of adjournment? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All those
No.
opposed? Motion carries and our meeting is adjourned.
All right.
That's how the meeting would go to keep everything orderly. Again, you only get unrecognized because when everybody's speaking at once, pretty soon you have no idea what you're talking about. And that's what all these motions are all about. So it tells you some are very important, you need to interrupt for, because if you keep holding till later, it makes no sense to make it. But most of them require that you be recognized, so that the debate is clear and concise, and goes forward. Next week, I will mercifully end this series, and I'll get on with your regular Toastmasters lives.